Hey folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. Finally, in today's episode, we start the intermediate build series. If you haven't watched my beginner series, definitely go watch that first. That's one where you should go watch it, build a couple of knives before, probably 5 or 10 knives, before you start in the intermediate series. In this one, we're going to start with something like this. This is a hunting knife, but it's going to be a hidden tang, which means a guard or a bolster. In this case, it's going to be a guard, a hidden tang, so it's going to have a different kind of handle. So a little more complicated. Also in this series, we're going to be doing damascus. So this is going to be damascus by hand. So for those that have watched the beginner series, that assumed almost no tools. The intermediate series is going to assume you have a grinder, maybe not a press, but have some way to grind the knife that's like a 2x72 or something like that. So let's go down to the table and get started. So let's talk about what we're going to build. First, we're going to build something like this, a profile similar to this, hunting knife, hidden tang, but we'll talk more about this when we get there. First, let's talk about the billet and how we're going to build that. So I got a bunch of scraps here of some steel. Most of it, well, all of it is either 1095, and this 1095 is all 1/8 inch, okay? And then I've got 4 pieces of 15 and 20. And remember, 15 and 20 is really just 1080 steel with a little bit of nickel added. So it's got 2% nickel added to it. That's really the only difference. The nickel in the steel resists etching. So that's why it's always a combination where you get something that etches dark, like 1080 or 1095, and then something that resists etching, so this will stay more silver. And that's the basis of Damascus. I like to use pretty thin 15 and 20. The theory of using the same thickness, all that does is give kind of thicker, brighter 15 and 20 lines, but I think it looks good to have really thin lines. Also, the thinner your stock to begin with, the more layers you can do. And since we're going to be doing this by hand, I don't want a really thick stack because I'm going to blow out my shoulder trying to forge it down. So what we're going to do, since I have 4 layers of 15 and 20, you don't want these really thin pieces of steel on the outside of the billet, because when these heat, since they're so thin, they will bow, and then you'll get some issues with oxidation on inside. So you always want these on the inside of the billet. So I'm going to need 5 pieces of 1095, 1 between each and 1 on the ends. Okay, I have 4 here, and this one's big enough, so we're going to cut this down. So we're going to cut them all down, and then we're going to clean up all of the steel. The 15 and 20 usually I don't clean up because it resists corrosion pretty well. I just got a little bit on it, so I'll clean it up a little bit. But I am going to surface grind all of the 1095. I want clean surfaces. Some people don't take off mill scale, but it only takes a few minutes, and anything that will increase your chances of forge welding, I think you should do it. So, and I need to trim up some of these. You can see some of them are just odd sizes. So we're going to cut this all to length, and then we'll grind it and stack it up.
I would normally do this on my surface grinder, but here I'm simulating that you probably don't have one of those.
All right, so we got our steel all cut up and ground. So now we're going to take some acetone and just make sure there's no grease or grime or fingerprints or anything on it. So I usually just put it in a little bath. make sure it's nice and clean. Now the one side of the 1095 is going to be, that's going to be on the outside, so we don't care about cleaning that. So the one thing I didn't talk about, always mark your steel and which one is the 15N20, which one is 1095. I didn't have to do that because mine are a different size. If you do use steel that's the same thickness, make sure you mark it. You do not want to get through all the way through your billet and find out you had two 15N20s or two of your 1095s side by side. So here we made sure we got them all alternating. Okay, so next step, we're going to be welding. So this is a small billet, okay? This is only about 3 inches across, maybe 3.5. So I'm just going to do the corners, okay? If this was wider than 4 inches, I recommend you put one line of bead down the center. I don't like to do that because then you can't press the sides because you'll press that mild steel into your billet. So I usually like to just do the corners. Hence, I keep my Damascus billets to 4 inches so I don't have to put that center bead down there. All right, we're going to use a MIG welder. Okay, again, if you don't have a MIG welder, you can use a stick welder. You will need some kind of way to weld these together. Don't do the stainless steel clamps. Like, go buy a $100 welder and weld the edges. I also do not like to use tongs, meaning hold it with tongs. So I am going to weld a little piece of rebar, a little rebar handle. I don't like the big long rebar handles. I like a little stubby handle that I can just grab with bolt jaw tongs. So that's what you're going to see me do.
Like I said, I happen to be using a MIG welder with gas, so this goes pretty cleanly. I used to use a stick welder and it works just fine. It just takes a little more practice.
So here's our billet all welded up. The important thing is to just make sure the corners are fully welded and that you don't have any visible gaps here. So that's pretty good. Also, you'll notice I put a lot of weld here and here. And that's just to make sure you don't lose your handle from banging it. So let's talk a bit about the Damascus. So we only have, 9 layers of Damascus. So if we were to just make a random pattern, honestly, it's not going to look that interesting. Random pattern meaning we just forge it out flat, draw it out, and make a billet out of it. Okay? The billet's going to be, an 1/8 or a 3/16 thick. The pattern just will not look that good. The one pattern that does look good with a low layer count is a twist. So what we're going to do is, first we're going to forge weld this together, okay, to make sure that everything is stuck, and then we're going to draw it out a little bit this way, but then we're going to hammer the edges and bring it down into a square that's about a 1/2 inch, okay, and then we're going to twist it, and I'm going to show you and talk about all the techniques to do the twist, but first we got to get it forge welded.
Obviously, you're going to need a forge that can get hot enough to forge weld. I'm not going to go into too much detail on forge welding. I have a video on that and I'll put a card up in the corner. So before the billet gets up to forge welding temperatures, I'm taking it out and I'm adding some flux. This is anhydrous borax. Yes, you can get the borax from your grocery store, but it's not as good as this. I recommend spend the money and get the anhydrous borax. Borax will prevent scale from forming, so it's good to use here. This is just a shot of the forge to show you how much dragon's breath or how much flame is coming outside the forge. This is a good indication of how much air to fuel mixture you have.
Hey folks, want to take a pause here and talk about our sponsor, Maritime Knife Supply. If you're a knife maker, they have everything you need. from steel all the way to hydraulic presses and everything in between. They're up in Canada, but you can shop in US prices and pay in US dollars, and they'll ship it anywhere in the US or elsewhere. So go take a look at Maritime Knife Supply. The link's down in the description.
Now to set the weld. You'll notice how hot the billet is, and you can see the borax kind of steaming off it. When setting the weld, I like to use the flat side of the hammer. I don't want to spread any material here. I'm just trying to tack it together. Now just some light taps to set the weld. Don't go too aggressive here. You want to just set the welds lightly and start from the inside out. You can see the dark spot on the one side. That's a layer that's not welded. We'll get that in the next heat. A little more flux and we're back in the forge for a reheat. Here we are in the second heat, still setting the weld. I'll go a little more aggressive than the first time, but not that much. You'll notice here that there's no dark spots. It's all the same color, so it's all welded up. Now that I'm on the third heat, I'm going quite a bit more aggressive. You're able to do much heavier strikes now. Now the billet should be fully forge welded. Now we're going to get really aggressive. I got the 4-pound hammer here and we're going to go to town. You'll notice I'm also hitting it on the edge. That's when you know you're really forge welded, if it doesn't come apart. And now that the billet's fully forge welded, there's no need for flux anymore. And now it's just a bunch of heat, beat, and repeat. You can see now we almost have it in a long square shape. Now I'm starting to hammer in the corners a little bit. For a twist pattern, you want your billet to be cylindrical, because when you twist it, you don't want any cold shuts. That's when the steel folds over on itself, and it's much less likely to happen if you don't have sharp edges. With this heat, I pretty much have the billet in a round cylinder form, kind of like a cigar. That 4-pound hammer is a lot to swing. Here I move to my 2.5-pound rounding hammer. Now that I've got a cylinder shape, in order to twist it more easily, I'm going to put some flat spots on either end, or kind of a square spot, so that I can lock it in the vise and also put my twisting wrench so I have a flat area to attach it to. And now to put a flat spot at the other end. Okay, time for the twist. The first step is to lock it in a vise. Here I'm using my leg vise. Then I have a pipe wrench that I've welded a piece of rebar to, just so I have more leverage. And for a pipe wrench, you always want to be pushing on the handle. Don't lift on it, because it'll tighten as you push. And then just keep twisting. You want to go at least 10, probably 15 twists in total. You can't do this all in one heat though. It's going to take you a couple of heats. Here we go on heat number 2. On this one, as I'm twisting, I can feel that the top portion is kind of about to twist off. So that's when I reach for the Windex, and this could be water, it just happens to be the spray bottle that I have, and I just spray the top of it to cool it down, and that'll stop it from shearing off. That's also a good way to control how your billet is twisting in certain areas. And here we are at the final heat of the twist. It's going really well, and I'm happy how this turns out. It's nice and even. Here's a close-up shot of the billet after twisting and giving it a little brushing. It's looking really good. Our steel was placed back in the forge. Now it's time to hammer it out into something blade-shaped. The trick to twist Damascus is not getting your twist too thin so that by the time you forge it out, it's not wide enough for a blade. Here I think we're just right. Another technique is to do twists in opposite directions and then forge weld those together. That's called the Turkish twist. Very cool pattern.
So there's where we got today in this session. I ran out of gas, so I got to go get some more propane. But it's still, it's ½ inch thick at the ends. I was obviously beating on the center more. And of usable steel, it's about 6 inches. So I cut off the piece of rebar here, so I'm going to end up just cutting it about there, just to make sure I want to get all the twist portion. So I'll cut off there, I'll make this the tip, and we'll use this end piece as the tang. And I think we're going to get a pretty good knife out of this, maybe even a buoy. So in total time, it's been almost exactly an hour and a half of forging since I turned on the forge and started things up. So that's not too bad to get to where we are. All right, folks, stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to turn this into a knife.